Okay, so I immediately messed up the direct prior stream by clicking and exposing lock character classes again, but I definitely are going to remember not to do that anymore for sure. Right, so I'm gonna have to delete that other video, but in any case, this is sort of, I think, the logical progression after making the Grenadier Tinkerer build, is looking at the Spellweaver and sort of my personal preferred method of playing her, which is more in line with a Nuke aesthetic, I guess you could say, or a very loss-y build, as opposed to what most other builds I've seen suggested, which are focused on doing the spam repeatable attack with the Spellweaver, which makes sense with their level 9 card if you haven't seen it. But just like how I like using loss attacks with the Tinkerer, I, surprise, surprise, also like doing that with the Spellweaver. So I'm just going to delete this prior video so that it does not haunt me any longer. And voila, retribution. So, with the preamble here, just going to sort of do the same process if you haven't catch the last video. So going to be prosperity level 9 spoilers, as well as all of the other mishmash like chest items and random item design things that have been unlocked that are in the shop, and then otherwise we'll be going through talking about the Spellweaver, making the build, the premise, going through to level 9, as well as the items, enhancements, and attack modifier deck I would recommend, / what I use for it. So I think the latter is probably a little bit more accurate, which is to say that I'm not exactly pro Gloomhaven player or anything, just do 2, maybe 3 player games, and we only play on normal difficulty. But in any case, this is just sort of highlighting the build that I've used and had fun with, since there doesn't seem to be a whole lot of discussion of alternative builds with the Tinkerer or Spellweaver, which is especially crazy since they're starting characters. I searched up earlier. I literally could not find a single build or mention of the Black Hole other than people, which is the Spellweaver's level 9 card, which I'm building this entire build around about. Other than people saying, why not Inferno? So, this video is me saying this is why not. I did stream a couple of other times, specifically with the build, using it alongside the Eclipse locked class. So that I'll link that in the description, just sort of showing the effectiveness of it. But yeah, so to start with, we'll look at the level 1 cards. So, yeah, so for those not familiar with the Spellweaver, which would surprise me, especially if you're looking at a guide for level 9, which is the max level in the game, the Spellweaver's whole shtick is based around reviving Ether, which is that she recovers all of her burnt cards. So unlike others where they burn and are gone for the rest of the match, unless you get helped by somebody like Tinkerer, who has recover lost cards, your card's done. And her whole thing is, okay, well, what if I had a bunch of lost cards, but then as a result, I can get them back? So, yeah, that's kind of what I'm leaning into. I know some people really prefer building it with the non-loss attacks in mind, and then just basically building into that as strong as they can. But I'm sort of focusing more on nuking. So it's basically taking the premise of, if you can kill everything in the first room using losses, then that's reasonable use of the losses, as opposed to losing a lot of health, potentially cards due to damage, or whatever other resources which could help you further in the scenario. So this build, as well as with the Tinkerer Grenadier build, is basically taking that to the extreme, which is to say, if you put out as much damage as possible, while being efficient and smart about it, you can shorten the length of scenarios a lot by doing a lot of these high damage attacks. So Funny enough, I actually have a spreadsheet for this build. I'm just trying to think if it'll be spoiler or not. Let's find out, because I think I had it open to the Cthulhu face last time, and that would be extremely spoilery. But I do have a Spellweaver section as well. Okay, that's fine. I'll just put it on the other page and definitely not forget about it. It should be fine. So I'm just gonna. Admittedly, I didn't dry run through this, so I'll just try and remember what cards I had as I leveled up. But in case, so Fire Orbs is cool, multi-attack, multi-target attack, loss. Same with Impaling Eruption, Reviving Ether you're going to always want to have. Freezing Nova is meh, it's a melee attack, and then the bottom is Lost Heal, which is whatever. Mana Bolt is great, it allows us to use the elements we put in the air, and it also allows us to go super fast. Same with Frost Armor. Bottom is cool if you just want to burn EXP. Flame Strike is probably one of my favorite Spellweaver cards. Very, 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 very important in my mind in the sustain build rather than the nuker build, and also useful while we, still have slots for it in this build. Ride the Wind is not useful. This is theoretically useful for boosting attack damage, but it's kind of hard to put Wind in the air when their only one is another loss. So Mystic Ally for the additional DPS in the first few missions. Then Ride the Wind just because we only have 8 card slots to begin with. So gonna talk about items for Prosperity level 1 here. It is literally just a carbon copy of the Tinkerer, which is to say that Piercing Bow and Eagle Eye Goggles. So Piercing Bow, I'm not going to open up the store because it has all level 9 Prosperity stuff. But yeah, Eagle Eye Goggles, you get advantage on for an entire attack action. Suspend Headgear, which means you get it back every time you long rest. We long rest a lot with the Spellweaver because we want to be very, very particular with which card we lose every burn, every rest cycle that is. And then we get those back. We have short rest cycles anyway since we're only running 8 cards at max. And we're going to be running multi-target loss attacks, so we definitely want to get a lot of value out of those by using our, using advantage where applicable. So Piercing Bow is also useful for getting rid of shield. We're only doing attack 3s here before modifiers, so being able to blast through the shield of something that already has 1, 2, or 3, even at like low to mid levels, is very useful. It effectively doubles our damage against shielded enemies. We also don't really have a whole lot of like useful items otherwise I can think of that are useful, that are like actually usable for us, especially at low Prosperity level. So I will be talking about all the Prosperity things as we level up, or rather I will be going through each level ups up to level 9 with the Spellweaver, and then going through all the items at that point that I currently have unlocked in this playthrough, which will be up to and including Prosperity level 9, but I'm going to delay that where applicable for anybody who's just watching this for maybe the first level or the first few. Alright, so into level 2. Bum, 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 bum. So, interesting thing to note, we do get a card every level, and there are 8 levels ahead of us, which is to say we get 8 more cards. Because the Spellweaver only has a hand size of 8, and one of those is Reviving Ether, that is to say that we are going to be picking a card level up that we are then not going to use, or actually a couple depending on the scenario. So the first few levels are actually kind of rocky for this build insofar as the picks aren't actually that good per se, but we'll go through with the premise of, okay, well, if we want to do a lot of damage and we're focusing using our loss attacks to hopefully wipe out a multiple like weaker enemies rather than focusing on tough singular enemies, which hopefully our teammates are going to be able to deal with, just approaching it from that perspective. So out of these two, Flashing Burst is an attack 3, which is cool and all. It's move 4. It's one of her faster cards. But Icy Blast is kind of where it's at for the sake of being a loss multi-target attack, putting ice in the air, which will be useful to us later, as well as having a lost bottom as a heal, which is potentially useful in very, 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 very niche situations. So to be completely honest, I picked this card the first time I did this build, and I like used it never. I used the top, I think maybe a grand total of 3 times throughout her, like, I don't know, 20 some missions, 20 some scenarios. Because doing an attack 2 is just not good, generally speaking. Even if you're targeting 7 people, you're muddling them, it's just not good. If you like go the Craighart route and use it for Dirt Tornado, like Dirt Tornado, and add a curse in there, so you get 7 curses on enemies and you muddle them, so they pretty much are guaranteed to pull a bunch of those. That's cool. As an actual like attack thing for us, not really that super great. That being said, the focus of this build is, nuking things. So useful again, because if you have a lot of targets in an area and they aren't running shield, if you pull good on modifiers, etc., you can still potentially deal up to 14 damage with it. So we are going to pick that card. Like I said, we are going to get rid of it rather soon though. So if you did want a little bit more consistency, especially because we are going to be having a lot of lost cards later on, you could maybe consider keeping Flashing Burst on. That is another option, because this is a pick that's going to be lost in the future anyway. So what we want to get rid of is probably Ride the Wind. It's very situational, don't really need to always pick up money. You could also consider getting rid of one of these 3 cards, which don't make it like super long into this build, but personally I'm a fan of Flame Strike Bottom. A lot of people absolutely adore Mana Bolt for the bottom, for the initiative, and the ability to add Strengthen to the bottom in order to basically give yourself advantage on 2 turns. And Frost Armor is a alternative to Mana Bolt for fast-ish initiative, as well as having the ability to use a attack 3 top with Infuse. So in my case, I'm going to get rid of Ride of the Wind. We level up again. We're going to be doing a lot of that though. Level 3. So yeah, the sustain build for, I call it sustain, I don't know if there's actually a better term for it. The meta build, I guess you could say, for Spellweaver is very much based around Cold Fire. So putting fire in the air, putting ice in the air as repeatable actions, using Cold Fire because it is a repeatable attack 3, target 3 stun. Or I guess attack 3, hex 3, I guess is more specific, because Fire Orbs is actually a target 3. It doesn't matter what shape they are, where they are positioned, as long as they're within range. And you have line of sight. But in any case, yeah, very, very good, stunnable, repeatable, decent damage-ish card, and that's what the other build focuses on a lot. And we're also going to grab it because heal and shield doesn't really do anything, and again, I'm not really concerned about focusing on move 4s or fast-ish initiative or repeatable attacks. So likewise, the Spellweaver does have a lot of lost cards that put fire or ice in the air, so it's not unreasonable in my eyes to also focus on any card that gets buffed by that. So having like I'm not trying to swear off repeatable actions with this build, so being able to use those loss actions and then use the elements generated from them to their greatest effect basically necessitates using Cold Fire, since like half the cards generate fire or ice. So card to get rid of at this point, you could either look at Icy Blast. Like it's really not that good compared to other things. That being said, it is one of our few sources of ice generation at this point, so I personally hung on to it. You could look at getting rid of Aid from the Ether. I know people love it because of the chip damage it can do. Like it has a pretty strong attack despite being rather weak at range. That being said, it has low health and it has low movement, and it suffers all of the normal shenanigans of AI in AI summons in Gloomhaven. Now that being said, they did actually make an announcement earlier this week where I believe it's an option in the game. It's not like something they're enforcing, but you're going to be able to make it so that if summons don't have any focus, they'll follow you, which is to say that the summons with movement, that more than one, will actually keep up with you and then be ready to fight in the next room as well. So that is extremely useful and very important quality of life change that pretty much everybody's been asking for, even for the base game. So that could make Aid from the Ether a little bit more viable, especially because you get a lot of damage efficiency with Aid from the Ether due to its ability to be a attack 3 every round, so long as it stays alive. That being said, in its current state, and or if you don't house rule it, it's not super critical to this build because we're more so focusing on, like, well, again, nuking things. Just dealing a lot of damage on each round, trying to neutralize threats as fast as they appear. I don't feel like summons are a good way to do it. Just kind of adds a lot of complexity to the pot, as well as having more lost cards active and persistently up at any given point. That being said, it is totally an option, and if you hung on to this, it's like as part of this build, I wouldn't say you're wrong to do that. I think that's completely reasonable. So for cards we are going to be looking at getting rid of, Flame Strike is one of our, I think it might actually be our only bottom attack with the Spellweaver. Yeah, so I'm hanging on to that as long as I can again. Frost Armor is, whilst a loss, yes, one of the sources of ice generation again. So your options are basically getting rid of one of the multi-target attacks, getting rid of Mana Bolt, or getting rid of Icy Blast or Aid from the Ether in order for Coldfire, in order to grab Coldfire. For the purpose of this build, which is just for my sake, focused on basically replicating the card choices I chose when leveling up, I'm going to get rid of Aid from the Ether in order to grab Coldfire. And that being said, if you haven't already considered it, this build absolutely suffers from initiative. When it hits level 9, I think my fastest initiative card was 41. So we'll get there when we get there, but it can definitely get kind of rough if you're not okay with initiative juggling or just like risking it and taking a lot of damage. So, next level. Cool. So this is the other level I was kind of referring to as having kind of suck choices, insofar as Spirit of Doom is like a pretty bad bottom in like 99% of instances. The top is okay-ish, but requires us to put Dark in the air, which isn't exactly our build's job and is just a loss execute normal target. And then the other option is, do we want to deal 2 damage to 2 people? Which also isn't great. Move 4s are cool, fast initiative is cool, being able to enhance this with, say, wound or or even more targets is very cool. But again, for the purposes of the build, which is like hit people fast for hard, yeah, not so great. Neither is a single target kill. I picked Flashing Burst last time, so I went back and picked up a lower level card, and then I literally didn't ever use it. So you know, again, depending on how long you're going to be sitting on these levels for, I believe when I created this person it was level 5 to begin with, because I was just running the I was running Flashing Burst and Coldfire, like the actual non-loss spam, the first time I played Spellweaver, at least here on the digital, that is. And then the second time around I started, I believe, at level 5. So the next level kind of like wipes the choices of this level off the floor. But in any case, I chose Flashing Burst, never used it. If you're going to be at this level for a bit, might be reasonable to grab Flashing Burst or even Forked Beam if you feel like you need non-loss on multi-target. But I feel like the best thing to do is sort of specialize into non-loss or loss single target or loss multi-target to try and deal as much damage as possible. Forked Beam is only 2 damage, but at the exact same time, our highest damage cards at this point are 3 or 4 damage. So, or sorry, 3 damage. So it's not really that much of a downgrade. Likewise, Mana Bolt and Frost Armor without any elemental infusions are also only 2 damage. So again, I don't think, just like with the Tinker build, I don't think, and with an Aid from the Ether, I don't think you'd be wrong to select Forked Beam, because Spirit of Doom is incredibly reliant on circumstances to line up. But in any case, for the focus of this build, and like if you were to go all in, Spirit of Doom would probably be the better route. That being said, I'm also not going to necessarily suggest you actually select it, especially at this level, which is level 4. Level 5, the next level, is where it actually gets a lot more viable. So I click the card. There we go. So boom bam, put any element you want in the air, put all the elements in the air, or a repeatable top that puts fire in the air. So again, for the other build, this is absolutely great. Maybe I'll just make, you know what, I'm probably going to stop mentioning the other build and I'm just going to make another video about it maybe. I don't know. It's super meta. It's super people talk about it a lot, so I think it might be redundant, but nonetheless, anyway, what we want is chromatic explosion, is long story short. So being able to put in up elements of custom type is going to be really important later on. I literally never used chromatic explosions top. So I know some people suggest, even on the other build, just bringing like move 4s or whatever bottoms, and then putting the generate any element on it, so basically make it function as a budget chromatic explosion. That would also be a decent choice for the build, which is focused on loss multi-target attack. I think it's fine to bring chromatic explosion if you're in a situation where other people on your team are using elements, you're planning on using cold fire next round, and there's enemies grouped up and you maybe don't have fire orbs or impaling eruption available or in your hand at the moment. It works. It fits within the theme of the build. Again, I primarily used it for the bottom, but it's, you know, nice to have options. So. We can look at probably replacing Icy Blast, honestly, so the easiest choice. I just really do not like that card. That being said, because we now have Chromatic Explosion, we can generate Dark, which means we can use Spirit of Doom as an execute. Again, it's not, in my eyes, a super duper good card because it's a loss and it's a normal and it's requiring an element. But yeah, it is an option. If you were to go that route, I'd probably still hang on a Flame Strike. Honestly, I like I said with the other guide, I'm just a simp for bottom attack, so I will hold on to this as long as reasonable. At this point, because we do have a couple of different methods of generating ice, namely Chromatic Explosion and Icy Blast, if you do decide to bring it, you could probably get away from Frost Armor, especially because the bottom of it is more of a tank build and the top is just a duplicate of Mana Bolt. So you could bring that. And again, alternatively, you could just get rid of Spirit of Doom, bring Icy Blast again, or Frost Armor. So you have a couple of options at this level. Yeah, it's just, this build is very touchy the first few levels, but it really wraps together nicely by the end, I do promise. Alright, so here's where it gets spicy. If we're the other build, we take Living Torch because it is a non-loss repeatable attack, and if you infuse light, i.e. use Flashing Burst or bottom, very, very, very cool. Bottom is, again, another summon loss and has crazy synergy with the other build, but for the purposes of our build, we don't really care for the summons, like I said. So personally, I went with Frozen Knight. This is, like, I'm not going to say the best, but, like, arguably the best until we get to level 8 for our loss attacks. So I mean, it's an attack 4. Yes, it's melee, but it generates ice. It has a decent initiative, especially compared to the other ones we have available at this point. It has decent range and size due to it being a 5 hex that you can enhance into a 7 hex. And the bottom is extremely sweet. It gives us our only class available, so not using any items or any other teammates or anything. Our only class available, Invisible, and it's Dark, which also fits with the theme of Spirit of Doom and Black Hole once we get there. So again, Chromatic Explosion coming in clutch in that regard again. So Frozen Knight's a very easy choice in my eyes. If you were holding on to Icy Blast up to this point, I would strongly recommend getting rid of it just for Frozen Knight, because its bottom is repeatable. Its bottom is, I mean, its initiative is lower. Its top is stronger and does the same thing, which is put ice in the air. If you are absolutely a lover of ice and stunning every round with cold fire rather than actually dealing damage, maybe you want to bring both. I don't know. In any case, like Spirit of Doom would be a really easy one to also consider getting rid of for the purposes of this build. At this point, because of the ability to generate ice and fire and use it for cold fire, I would probably say Flame Strike is a good one to consider losing, or in this case, in my case, because Mana Bolt is again not one that I've focused on putting a Strengthen on, maybe, you know, much to my deficit, and now that I can create people at level 9 with 150 gold from the get-go, it might be a lot smarter to enhance it with Strengthen from the get-go. I sort of just said, okay, well, this isn't really going to be a fast build, and I need to recognize that and be willing to, you know, use that to my advantage where applicable. So I, choosing Frozen Knight. That being said, you do have the option of also getting rid of Impaling Eruption at this point. So the benefit of it is a attack 4 as long as they're, all adjacent to each other. Although you do attack 1 with disadvantage. It has pretty much identical functionality to Fire Orbs for its bottom and initiative. And it generates Earth, which we don't use for anything. So it's also pretty easy to say get rid of Impaling Eruption in order to use, Mana Bolt and pick up Frozen Knight. But that's kind of the benefit of these card choices being extremely easy to do for this build. You have a lot of flexibility with which cards you bring in any particular case. So for instance, for me personally, I didn't choose Spirit of Doom. I chose Flashing Burst, but then I didn't end up bringing it. So it was the sort of thing where it's like, okay, well, maybe I'll bring Frost Armor, depending on the scenario rules. I'll bring Ride the Wind or Impaling Eruption. I feel like it's worth making an important note too for Crackling Air. It is kind of a cool card in premise, especially now that we're at the stage where we have Chromatic Explosion, where we can afford to put Wind in the Air as a non-loss. Like Crackling Air is cool because if you can get it working, it gives you +8 damage across 4 attacks. Because it is a per attack and not per attack action, it is somewhat more restrictive though. We're at the stage where we can do an attack 5 or an attack 7 potentially. So adding +2 attack to them is extremely spicy on something like Icy Blast, but at the same time, it's only basically 1 attack action worth of +2s, and you can achieve 1 pip less than, or 1 damage less than that for a minor power potion for 10 gold, or a major power potion especially should be available once you're hitting level 6 with stuff. Yeah, I might play around with it some more in the future maybe, because again, it's a level 1/X card, so you can swap it out whenever. Not really at a risk for anything, and it does give a significant damage boost for like our lower levels, especially when we're fighting enemies which only have like 10 health. So I might give it another go. I didn't try it out because again, I started at level 5 with this build specifically, but that might be another thing to maybe keep an eye on. But yeah, you have a couple of options. In any case, I got rid of Impaling Eruption, so you can kind of flex with whichever other one you want. So if you did want to hold on to Spirit of Doom just for being able to execute things, especially like I said again, if you have a single or maybe only a few high HP enemies or high shield enemies in a scenario, you're probably not as stingy with using a execute, because it's effectively dealing 20 damage as long as you can get that Dark in the Air consistently. For our next level, we have a couple of pretty spicy options. So if you did end up holding on to or loving Impaling Eruption, Stone Fists is kind of a no-brainer insofar as it lets you have a lot of utility with being able to do a multi-target immobilized push. It is a lot of damage as well. It's like just from the overview of the build, it seems like the better choice. That being said, because of the existence of and how spicy the level 9 card is, it's just way better in my eyes to do Twin Restoration. That being said, of course, if you're not approaching it from like a top level down approach, or if you're like not going to hit level 9 with the character, then it's perfectly reasonable, I think, to just go with Stone Fist. That being said, you would have to fit Impaling Eruption back in the build or use Chromatic Explosion for that, on top of its use as a dark, maybe even as a fire for Cold Fire. So trying to juggle like 2-3 different elements with this build, or sorry, 3+ elements, well 4 in this instance, is not great in my eyes. But that being said, like it's an attack 6 targeting 2. That's pretty spicy. Like we haven't had any damage values that are 6 or higher this far. So in any case, I chose Twin Restoration. So this lets us use our absolute big slam-a-jam attacks even more. I believe technically from a sustain/stamina standpoint, if you actually look at burning a card to retrieve one other card, if you burn this card as a loss, then you get 2 cards back, so your net effect is +1 card. But because you want to use this as soon as you have 2 cards in your graveyard, so you have more cards in your hand, so you can go longer before rests and longer before you exhaust, I think bringing this card actually reduces your stamina compared to, as long as you're like using loss actions, compared to just having an additional card that you can use throughout the scenario. So I don't know if I'm explaining that super well, but basically I think this leads itself a lot more to the Nuker build, not only because we can bring back our 2 most powerful cards twice, but because of how it affects stamina. I'd have to actually look at the math on it, but I'm not at the moment. So yeah, for what to get rid of, like I said, either Mana Bolt or Flame Strike around the chopping block again. You could theoretically get rid of Spirit of Doom, and then that way you don't have to worry about juggling Dark, especially because, I mean, like, you have only 1 Dark generation naturally, and Chromatic Explosion's already looking at a couple of different effects. And then Dark is also extremely useful for Frozen Night. I guess in theory you could use a build that had Spirit of Doom and Frozen Night, play them both on the same turn, because 46 is one of the faster initiatives. For this build, you could run Frozen Night and Spirit of Doom in the same turn. Then you could decide if you want to move up and go invisible and then do a basic attack, or if you wanted to move up and like curse them, although I would definitely not use a curse loss, or if you wanted to just like, or sorry, I think I misexplained that. If you want to move and then go invisible, or if you want to do a kill normal target, like, you'd have the ability to consume Dark on either action. But yeah, for the purpose of having this as like sort of a pocket helping thing, if you go and like, if you're looking at a scenario and it has something like, you know, the stone golems, then it might be like, okay, that's definitely the sort of scenario where having a execute is going to be a lot more useful than if we're fighting like just, you know, just the vermlings. So next level. And this is where things get spicy. So, for the other builds, people say this one is the suck, which is fair, unless you're doing like a hyper mobility mission, or if you're being greedy guts. And this is also not super great due to its shape. It's low initiative and it's double loss, but this is like the best card for this build. So, again, based off of the level 9 card we have available, but this is an attack 5, which does a butt ton of damage. It generates ice, which lets us boost cold fire again, and it is a multi-target loss, so of course it, you know, fits well within the confines of the build. So in this case, you're probably looking at getting rid of Flame Strike, because you're going to probably start having to use mobility to get these weird hex formations actually working out for you. You're not really going to be able to afford using bottom attacks as much in my eyes. That being said, you could of course also get rid of Mana Bolt. You could also have gotten rid of Mana Bolt a long time ago and brought Crackling Air or something else like that. So a lot more loose of, you know, which cards you bring compared to, you know, say some of the other characters or builds. If you want to just go full in on being damage and like exhausting quick, you could even run something like this, although at this point your fastest initiative is only 46 and your second fastest is in the 60s. So for our last level, the card everybody other than me likes to hate on, which is Black Hole. Absolutely phenomenal card, love it. Inferno is the card everybody else loves. So attack 3, target all enemies, potentially make an attack 4. All allies in the same room suffer damage. Whatever, we don't really care about them. Fast initiative, high attack damage, you know, 4 damage. Hits everything. It's a lot of damage, but that's not the purpose of this build, so we take Black Hole. Because with Black Hole, if we have Dark in the air, it lets us execute 3 enemies. And oh my god, that is so great, especially when you're fighting things that have a lot of health and a lot of shield. So the ridiculous thing about this is Black Hole bottom is what leads into Black Hole top. So it's hard to get a execute on 3 enemies unless you pull them, and the only pull we have by default is the bottom. So, you know, we'll talk about items. We'll talk about items when we get there. In any case, at this point, you have the choice of getting rid of you know, another card. I kept Fire Orbs till the end because I like the fire generation for boosting Cold Fire. I like Cold Fire because it's a non-loss repeatable, and the bottom is a loot, so we can use it on the same turn as Reviving Ether to just pick up any ambient gold and then get that card as well as every other one back anyway. Spirit of Doom is probably the easy one to get rid of because we can still use Chromatic Explosions bottom for generating. We can use Frozen Night and Cold Front for doing a shit ton of damage, and Twin Restoration and, you know, Reviving Ether are kind of no-brainers for the sustain on the build. So this is kind of what it was looking like as my deck. So again, yeah, you'll run into problems with your fastest initiative is 41, but there's some ways to rectify that. So this stage we can probably look at items. That being said, I think it's also important to note if you do end up having a Tinkerer, they can bring Chimeric Formula and they can give you your other level 9 card, well, any card. So you can choose to be a Spellweaver who brings Black Hole and then also bring Inferno or any one of these other cards, or maybe any of these cards you didn't pick up the first time. It's kind of arguably a waste to burn a card on one class to give the other card another card, but in this case, with it A being the Spellweaver, B being the Spellweaver that likes using losses and thus like running out of stamina, and C being the class with the smallest hand size, I think it's a worthwhile trade-off. That being said, I didn't even build this Tinkerer with it. Not my build style either way. I don't know if there are very many people who run the Tinkerer up to level 9, or if they do, if they bring Chimeric Formula, or if they do, if they actually like using the bottom rather than just cycling losses with the top. Because, you know, you have some synergy with this class potentially by being able to use your strong losses such as Cold Front and Frozen Night, then having the Tinkerer cycle your losses, so maybe get rid of Fire Orbs and Chromatic Explosion, or, you know, whatever. And then being able to run your powerful ones again. And again, this build is with Twin Restoration and Reviving Ether. It's honestly basically just using Frozen Night, Cold Front, and Black Hole tops. You don't really need, sorry for losses, you don't really need Fire Orbs as top. And then Twin Restoration just leads into using the other ones. You don't really need Chromatic Explosions top either because you're using it for the bottom for boosting. So while it's sort of a nuke build, like I was really only using Fire Orbs and Chromatic Explosion as like losses when I was resting. I wasn't really attacking with them a whole lot, just because I feel like you have enough ways to put the elements from those into the air. And I mean, you know, Frozen Knight's 4 damage, Cold Front's 5 damage, and Black Hole is 4 damage, potentially kill if you have Dark in the air. So we'll look at items. Yeah, I think items will be the best thing to look at next. So again, Prosperity level 9, you know, spoilers for items as well as random scenario items, etc. So there's, you know, risk there if you aren't already aware of that with the whole spoiler build of it by default. But anyways, so jumping into it. So we talked about using the Eagle Eye Goggles to begin with at lower level. I mean, I think it's probably still the best bet at higher level. If you are running a enhancement that lets you strengthen yourself frequently, or you're running teammates that give you advantage, another really good choice is Pendant of Dark Packs, because it's going to let you get your bag items back. That being said, I just personally used Eagle Eye Goggles, especially because the Pendant of Dark Packs is expensive. But if you have the money and if you feel like tinkering around with it, I feel like this would be better for being able to, you know, get cards back, sustain yourself just a wee bit longer. For chest items, it's sort of a weird question. I tried a couple of different things. Sacrificial Robe, namely, because I was sort of trying to go all out on dealing damage on a couple attacks. I just felt it unwieldy, especially because even as like a max level Spellweaver, we only have like I think 14 or 16 health. It's just not really viable to lose damage to just for one attack. Robes of Evocation would be useful if you're running Chromatic Explosion a lot, or if you have people putting up ambient elements that they're not using, such as a Tinkerer. But again, as a chest item for like consuming an element, maybe if there are any, for one attack, just didn't seem worth it. That being said, both of these are spent items, so if you did, you know, do a lot of long resting, which you probably should with Spellweaver, due to their already low sustain, then either of those can work. I'd stick away from armor, even the studded leather armor, because we are trying to be at range most of the time. You could bring Cloak of Pockets for more potions. Personally, I went the method of going with Second Skin, and we'll get to that once we get into the attack modifier deck, but that's just my note. Second Skin, alternatively, I feel like Cloak of Pockets would be a good close second. For feat items, because of the incredibly low average initiative of the build, as well as how frequently we are resting, I straight up went with Boots of Quickness, like the actual 20 initiative ones, not just the Boots of Speed for the 10%, or for the 10 initiative, because 20 initiative is makes a big difference when our average is 40. 20 initiative outspeeds a lot of things. 40 outspeeds like 3. So Boots of Quickness are very, 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 very important in my eyes. Alternatively, you could bring Magma Waders for maybe a little bit more sustain and positioning, or Boots of Levitation, or Boots of sprinting where it's lower variance. But I feel like with a move 3 and a move 4, and move 4 jump, move 5 if you enhance it, move 3 otherwise, and then a move 3, I felt like I had enough mobility even without using these, but I did definitely have initiative troubles. So trying to patch up a problem that we created by using or making this build, yes, absolutely, but I also felt like it really helped the build succeed in instances where it otherwise wouldn't, which is to say fighting enemies that are faster than most of the game. Then for hand items, you have another couple of interesting choices. Like I said, with the Tinkerer, the Volatile Bomb and the Unstable Explosives are crazy good if you have a single target attack that you want to kind of propagate, like if you have Engulfed in Flames or Living Torch from the other build, but we don't in this case. So I kind of just stuck with the Piercing Bow. I wanted to use other things, but I just couldn't really see the value in it. You could run Hooked Chain with Flame Strike, like I said. I mean, you do have a couple of other options for generating elements. Heck, you could even use Warhammer with Frozen Knight if you really wanted to. Kind of be a budget, well, it's not budget at all, be a super expensive version of Flamethrower from the Tinkerer, especially if you enhance it with Wound. But yeah, I felt like Piercing Bow just ended up working the best, especially because we are doing these multi-target big damage attacks, and again, you're going to be running into lots of enemies with shields anyway. And the Tinkerer, for instance, if you were running this specific pairing, is much, much more focused on doing the Volatile Bomb and Unstable Explosive shenanigans in my eyes. That being said, you could also run Comfortable Shoes, Serene Sandals, and then Balance Blade, or whatever the other one is, Versatile Dagger, if you were wanting to run a bit more into using the default actions where the situation arises, because being able to do an attack 4 against a single target is pretty useful, since we do, of course, pretty much have 0 single target high-ish damage attacks. You have to either choose to just use a basic attack, or use a loss if you only have a single target, or hope that your teammates can polish them off. So couple options there in any case. I just felt like Piercing Bow was sort of the most versatile. Then for bag items, pretty straightforward. I kind of went over a lot of the different synergies with these and the last one with the Tinkerer. Basically, healing is not necessarily as important as with the other ones because you are extremely squishy and deal a lot of damage, so you want to be pretty far back anyway. But Mana Potion is good. I wouldn't really bother with bringing a major. You can kind of just do a minor and get away with it since it's a lot cheaper. And there aren't really, I didn't personally have any situations where I needed ice and fire in the air. I just needed one because I already had the other one for cold fire. So this is kind of a waste unless you want to put another element up for a teammate, or if, for instance, you want to put up the other element you're missing for cold fire and then use Frozen Night Bottom, for instance. So those are options. Stamina Potion is just, it's honestly what you should do. It's Major Stamina Potion, Minor Stamina Potion are pretty much the two biggest things with the Spellweaver, just due to your very limited non-loss attack ones, and the fact that pretty much every loss you're going to use is going to put an element in the air for the non-loss attack, and your low card count, especially when you're using a lot of losses. So that's important. And then Power Potions. So I ran Major Stamina, Minor Stamina, Major Power Potion, a minor mana potion, which I think I changed for a major mana potion because I had Eclipse teammate at the time. And then the most important one for this specifically in my eyes is Ring of Brutality. Reason being, this kind of ties the whole build together, because round one or any situation where you have multiple enemies on the ground, what you can do is you can run your Black Hole bottom, group enemies up. Maybe you want to use Cold Fire top for dealing a little bit of damage, or maybe some CC, or put some elements in the air depending on what your attack modifiers are. Maybe you want to bring a faster card and use Mana Bolt just for the super fast initiative. Maybe you want to actually attack them a little bit for Frozen Knight. Whatever the case is, Black Hole bottom and attack top, or just a wasted top action, and then using a minor stamina potion, getting Black Hole back, using Ring of Brutality, and then using Black Hole to execute. And then turn one, you're executing 3 enemies. If they're, if you're in a party size of 2, that's probably half the room. If you have multiple elite enemies or like a single elite enemy, not as much of an option anymore, but that's not really where this build excels to begin with. So I'm not too terribly concerned with saying, oh, well, because this sucks at dealing with a single enemy, or with, isn't as efficient with doing that, or sucks at dealing with multiple elite enemies. In regards to Black Hole, I'm not exactly writing off. And like I said, I still had a lot of fun and had a lot of luck with running this build. So that could work. Because of that, you could also theoretically run like the second chance ring. If you wanted to have, the ability to do this more than once per scenario, maybe you want to run Pendant of Dark packs with the Ring of Brutality, so whenever you use Twin Restoration and get Black Hole back, you can run the bottom and then top again. Otherwise, like I said, I just ran the 4 potions and then Ring of Brutality. Maybe you want to Cloak of Pockets and you can, bring Second Chance Ring and start area, and that way you can refresh your items whenever you need, when you absolutely need to go faster than somebody next round or something. I don't know. You have quite a few options, like I said, especially just due to the ambiguity of what to bring for the chest slot. But I'm not looking at that as a bad thing. I think it's pretty neato being able to be versatile like that and sort of adapt to situations. So, like I said, with Second Skin is what I use for my chest item, and we'll look at the attack modifier decks and see why that is. Alright, so, whoops. To begin with, like I said, same as last time, I just like getting rid of the negatives and shifting the deck up. So to begin with, we'll be getting rid of the negatives, and then we'll be adding more positives. So in this case, it's interesting to note, you do still have 3 -1s, a -2, and a null, and you can't get rid of that. So the only real way you can shift after these first 2 perks is just adding a whole bunch more 1s and 2s and whatnot, and hoping that you don't pull the negatives. So that's why I liked Second Skin, because it weaned down your negatives significantly. It literally halves. Instead of having a null, a -2, and 3 -1s, you only have 1 -1, a -2, and a null. So, slight benefits, and especially again when you're running advantage a lot, hopefully it to get you up. So likewise, if you're really wanting to be a purist, you don't even theoretically need to bring the +1s. You might want to get rid of the negative, or get rid of the zeros anyway, just to again sort of have a higher top heavy deck. But you could choose to not get the +1s and instead focus on more +2s, for instance. Fire in the air is great. Ice in the air is great because we like Cold Fire. A +1 curse is cool because why not? +1 immobilize is cool, because why not? +1 wound is cool, why not? Stun is the best CC other than death. So all those are pretty easy choices. I mean, again, if you don't want the +1s, then I wouldn't really recommend getting the immobilize or curse either, but at the very least you could still run the +2 fire, +2 ice, and the +1 wound, which, like I said in the last video, functions as a +2 effectively because they take the damage on their turn, and it can even be a 3, 4, 5, blah blah blah, whatever, as long as they don't get healed. So once we get into the flip cards again, I literally don't care for any of these. So like I said, if you're attacking with advantage, you can roll a rolling modifier and then a null, and then you deal 0 damage, and you don't get the element in the air, and we don't really care about any of these elements, or at least I don't. You use the dark maybe, but that's kind of what Chromatic Explosion is for. So pretty straightforward. I might toy around in the future with not getting rid of not getting the +1s or the +1 status effects, and maybe just trying it with the +2s and see how frequently I'm not pulling the null, negative, or -1. But in any case, especially when you're doing multi-attacks and doing with a disadvantage, like you're guaranteed if you're bringing second skin to only have like half of those being, you know, negatives and everything else is being positives. And it's obviously very shifted towards the plus side of the spectrum with this. So overall, pretty good, I think. And then we can talk about enhancements, which is interesting to note that they're enhancements in they're enchantments here. She's the enchantress, but in the board game they are, or in the Gloomhaven tabletop, it's enhancements. So that's fun. All right. So yeah, pretty straightforward. It's really going to depend on what cards you end up bringing to the high level. Cold Fire is easy. You're going to bring it. You want it. Add an area. Why not? Reviving Ether, you're always going to want to bring it anyway. So you have a move. It's already a jump. So it's kind of a question of, do you really want a move 4 to a 5? You can add any element to it as well, because you're going to be using this card a lot, especially as like your only jump, at least in this specific deck. So that's kind of a no-brainer. Black Hole doesn't really make sense to enhance, but like you have 9 enchantment points anyway. So like it really doesn't matter. You have 8 cards and you're probably not using a whole lot of these sideboard ones anyway. So you might as well, I guess. That being said, it does also allow you to make a pull 4, pull everything within 1 pip of that hole. Or on the hole, so it's a lot easier for being able to group things up in order to do your multi-target attacks. So sort of a why not, other than the incredibly high cost to it, but you know, in any case, it's not a priority in my eyes. Cold Front, yes, just add a damage. Why not? It's already one of your heaviest hitters. In fact, I think it is your heaviest hitter, other than technically Execute. Don't see any reason why not to. Range likewise gives you a lot more safety being at a range 3 than range 2. Really no reason not to. Twin Restoration, why not, sort of thing. I mean, if you're bringing this card for the top anyway, you have the bottom, might as well add a target's the only enhancement slot option there. And then for this, you could either strengthen if you want to rely less on the Eagle Eye Goggles, and if you really want to drive a nail in the coffin of running the rolling modifiers, or you could just add an additional heal to it. I was primarily using this to get rid of status effects like wound or poison. I wasn't really actually healing a whole lot with it, because 3 health at level 7 just isn't anything. But if you're bringing the card anyway, like strengthen is a pretty good choice. Likewise, you could even do bless, especially with it being a multi-target, but to each their own. Frozen Knight, great. Add hexes, why not? Add a wound or add more damage because it's another Slam-a-Jam, why not? Move, you can make this a move 6, you can make it a move 5 with jump, you can make it a move 3 with jump. It's pretty rad. Heck, you could even add any element and cycle stuff with it. You got a lot of options with this card. I didn't really mention it, but kind of a really super late disclaimer. I don't generally mess with enhancements because I generally retire people way before then, so I can't really say what like a best in slot option is for stuff. For most of these, but I can tell you what I would probably do for most of them, which is kind of why I'm giving like a hierarchy of them. Chromatic Explosion, I literally don't use this. Please do not choose any of the elements because you already generate all of the elements. But in any case, any CC or any plus attack, making an attack 4 makes it a bit more viable in any case, but we're using it for the bottom a lot, and it's a move 2, so making it a move 3 since it already generates any element is great. If you are wanting to like make it generate any 2 elements, maybe if you're feeling, you know, bougie and wanting to spend a shit ton of money, then also feel free to do that. I personally would stay away from it because again, I didn't feel like there's a lot of situations where I want to generate 2 elements, but it is an option, especially if you are spamming a lot of Cold Fire top and Frozen Knight bottom on the same turn. So that's an option, and it's a rather good option too because of the invisibility and the fact that you have a lot of card recovery, at least with the items I've mentioned. And then for Fire Orbs, you can obviously make this a move 4, which is a lot more convenient and in line with the other cards. You can add a target to it, you can add a range to it, and then at that point when you have a target 4, then I think this card is a little bit more viable than just with a target 3, especially if you do add an additional attack to it. But between the mana potions, between Chromatic Explosion, and between the attack modifier decks, I didn't really feel like I was needing to use Fire Orbs a lot for the generate fire. So again, maybe if you have a lot of money to sink into it, and you could actually make Fire Orbs an attack 4 target 4, even attack 4 target 4 range 4, that, you know, can potentially be pretty spicy. That being said, it's going to get extremely expensive to enhance all that. So yeah, so for synergies, this is really dependent on having somebody either tank for you redirect aggro for you, not necessarily tanking insofar as taking the damage, or helping you kill things fast enough that they're not a threat to you. Again, I have a couple of other streams, which I will link in the description of this video, showing the effectiveness of the build, even when the other person isn't an aggro tank. So I feel like it can basically succeed in just damage racing stuff, which is really cool in my eyes, and that's basically what I was focusing on doing with both this Tinkerer and Spellweaver builds. Yeah, and I mean, you're a ranged attacker, not everybody's doing that, not everybody's multi-target, not everybody's being able to use lost cards and add a bunch of stun effect or status effects to enemies. So being able to do that, being able to CC, again, like I'm basically playing these two classes as like different flavors of the same playstyle, but I felt like they were both doing that pretty effectively. So I will potentially do another post on this, presuming my first one didn't get eaten by the mods, and then I will go grab the groceries that were just delivered and I'll eat those in the fridge. So I can probably do another video. I don't know if it'll be a today thing, or if anybody even cares, because I'm sure there's actually multiple videos and build guides around it already, but I'll look at maybe doing one about the other build, not so much the build that everybody's running, but so much as my personal twist on it, although admittedly I haven't tried it out personally either. Hint, it involves volatile bomb and unstable explosives and a lot of living torch tops. So we'll see how that goes.